Climate change in Australia has been a critical issue since the beginning of the 21st century. Australia is becoming hotter and more prone to extreme heat, bushfires, droughts, floods and longer fire seasons because of climate change. Since the beginning of the 20th century, Australia has experienced an increase of nearly 1 degree Celsius in average annual temperatures, with warming occurring at twice the rate over the past 50 years than in the previous 50 years. Recent climate events such as extremely high temperatures and widespread drought have focused government and public attention on the impacts of climate change in Australia. Rainfall in southwestern Australia has decreased by 10 to 20% since the 1970s, while southeastern Australia has also experienced a moderate decline since the 1990s. Rainfall is expected to become heavier and more infrequent, as well as more common in summer rather than in winter. Water sources in the southeastern areas of Australia have depleted due to increasing population in urban areas coupled with persistent prolonged drought. Predictions measuring the effects of global warming on Australia assert that global warming will negatively impact the continent's environment, economy, and communities. Australia is vulnerable to the effects of global warming projected for the next 50 to 100 years because of its extensive arid and semi-arid areas, an already warm climate, high annual rainfall variability, and existing pressures on water supply. The continent's high fire risk increases this susceptibility to change in temperature and climate. Additionally, Australia's population is highly concentrated in coastal areas, and its important tourism industry depends on the health of the Great Barrier Reef and other fragile ecosystems. The impacts of climate change in Australia will be complex and to some degree uncertain, but increased foresight may enable the country to safeguard its future through planned mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation may reduce the ultimate extent of climate change and its impacts, but requires global solutions and cooperation. While adaptation can be performed at national and local levels, analysis of future emissions trajectories indicates that, left unchecked, human emissions of greenhouse gases will increase several-fold during the 21st century. Consequently, Australia's annual average temperatures are projected to increase 0.4 to 2.0 degrees Celsius above 1990 levels by the year 2030, and 1 to 6 degrees Celsius by 2070. Average precipitation in southwest and southeast Australia is projected to decline during this time period, while regions such as the northwest may experience increases in rainfall. Meanwhile, Australia's coastlines will experience erosion and inundation from an estimated 8 to 88 centimeters increase in global sea level. Such changes in climate will have diverse implications for Australia's environment, economy, and public health. Future impacts will include more severe floods, droughts, and cyclones. Reaching zero emissions by 2050 possibly would not be enough for preventing 2 degrees temperature rise. The exposure of Indigenous Australians to climate change impacts is exacerbated by existing socioeconomic disadvantages which are linked to colonial and post-colonial marginalization. Climate issues include wildfires, heat waves, floods, cyclones, rising sea levels, rising temperatures, and erosion. The communities most affected by climate changes are those in the north where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people make up 30% of the population. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities located in the coastal north are the most disadvantaged due to social and economic issues and their reliance on traditional land for food, culture, and health. This has raised the question for many community members in these regions. Should we stay or move away? Greenhouse gas emissions by Australia totaled 533.36 million tons CO2 equivalent based on Greenhouse Gas National Inventory Report data for 2019, representing per capita CO2e emissions of 21.03 tons. Australia uses principally coal power for electricity, but this is rapidly decreasing with a growing share of renewables making up the energy supply mix, and most existing coal-fired power stations scheduled to cease operation between 2022 to 2048. Emissions by the country have started to fall and are expected to continue to fall in coming years as more renewable projects come online. Australia's instrumental record from 1885 to the present shows the following broad picture. Conditions from 1885 to 1898 were generally fairly wet, though less so than in the period since 1968. The only noticeably dry years in this era were 1888 and 1897. Although some coral core data suggest that 1887 and 1890 were, with 1974, the wettest years across the continent since settlement. Rainfall data for Alice Springs, then the only major station covering the interior of the Northern Territory and Western Australia, strongly suggest that 1887 and 1890 were overall not as